So what did you have for breakfast? Bacon and eggs? Oatmeal? Cold cereal? Maybe pancakes, or as folks from my wife's part of the country call them, panny cakes. Whatever the odds are pretty good that one of the items on your breakfast menu was bread in one form or another. Toast, English muffins, biscuits, bagels. Indeed, some folks have bread at every meal. Sandwiches for lunch, dinner rolls at supper time. It's no wonder that bread is called the staff of life. It is a staple in diets around the world. Tortillas in Mexico, pita in the Middle East, hearty rye in Eastern Europe, naan in India. Most anywhere you go, all across the world, you will be served bread at most every meal. No doubt, as the Israelites wandered through the wilderness after being freed from slavery in Egypt, one of the things they missed the most was bread. Perhaps as they escaped, they had managed to bring along some grain or meal with them, maybe even some of that unleavened bread that's part of the Passover story. But at the point of the wilderness expedition that's spoken of in the passage Frank read, at that point, their supplies are running low. Perhaps they are even depleted. And they are starting to grumble. Now, any of you who have ever taken a long road trip with children should be able to imagine the scene. I'm so hungry. I had a 14-year-old in my car, and all we were doing was coming from Fort Myers just the other day. And 2 minutes in, oh, I'm so hungry, Peepaw. Can we please stop at Sonic? It's his latest fast food love. But of course, there are no Sonics or McDonald's in the wilderness. Not even McDavid, which is what I've seen some of them called in Israel. There wasn't even a 7-Eleven for a Coke-flavored Slurpee and a bag of chips in the wilderness. No place to stop if one was hungry. Nothing. So suddenly, Egypt starts looking pretty darn good. In Egypt, we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread, they tell Moses. Or as Eugene Peterson translates it, we had lamb stew and all the bread we could eat. What are you trying to do, Moses? Starve us to death? Things, of course, may not have been quite so good, quite so wonderful in the good old days in Egypt. They were slaves, after all. Their meals may have been regular, but they were most likely rather sparse, more like Oliver Twist's gruel than Babette's feast. But memory, it does play tricks on us, doesn't it? And some of you lived through the Depression. You've told me about what a good time that was. When we are faced with a difficult present and an uncertain future, we often look at the past through rose-colored glasses. When we are faced with a difficult present and an uncertain future, we often look at the past through rose-colored glasses. Whatever the case for the Israelites, their complaints about nothing to eat, not enough to eat, are heard, not only by Moses and his brother Aaron, but also by God. And the Holy One responds to their needs. You want bread? I'll rain bread down on you from the sky itself. And not just bread, I'll send along quail as well, so that you have meat. Everybody needs protein in their diet. Manna in the morning, quail in the evening, just no sugar at supper time. They were to gather up a one-day supply of manna, no more, no less, or else it would turn to worms, except on Friday, when they could gather enough for 2 days so that they wouldn't have to work on the Sabbath. Now, assuming that this is an historical account, we don't know for sure what that manna really was. However, one scholar has a very intriguing suggestion. He writes, a type of plant lice, L-I-C-E, punctures the fruit of the tamarisk tree, which was very common in the wilderness. And then it excretes a substance. And from this substance, this juice, a yellowish white flake is formed. The flakes, which are loaded with carbohydrates, can be gathered up, as they are to this day by people on the Sinai Peninsula, and baked into bread. And the quail, very likely also a natural occurrence. Migrating birds in that region are often blown around by the desert winds into the wilderness area, and then are so exhausted from fighting the cross currents that they can easily be caught by hand, literally plucked right out of the air. Lice-producing flakes, quail for the picking. You see, God had already provided for the needs of those grumbling Israelites. But they were so busy carping and complaining that they didn't recognize the goodness that was right there in front of them, right under their noses, right above their heads. They have been freed from literal slavery in Egypt, but they were still in bondage to their expectations. Expectations that every meal would have lamb stew and bread. Expectations that prevented them from living in the present. Expectations that limited their ability to see the blessing God was already providing for them every morning and every night. So here's the question each of us must ask and answer for ourselves. Are you being held in bondage by your expectations? Expectations of good things or expectations of bad things? This is going to be an awful day. I just know it is. Expectations that hamper your ability to see and appreciate the good things that God has placed in your path now, today? Are you in bondage to those expectations? A parishioner once gave me a very strange and intriguing book called Mutant Message Down Under. It's not the sort of book that I would ordinarily buy and read. Parishioners sometimes give me very unusual things. And frankly, some of its philosophical underpinnings just do not sit well with me. But that said, it is an amazing and historically true account of an American suburbanite named Marlo Morgan and her trek through the wilderness in Australia, what is known as the Outback. In the book, Morgan describes the walkabout she took with an Aboriginal tribe in that remote region of the world. The Outback is, as you very well may know, some of you may have been there, a vast desert territory which stretches across much of the Australian continent. The tribe's travels were probably not unlike the Israelites' wanderings in the wilderness. What I found most helpful in the story was the tribe's perspective on having enough food, clothing, and shelter. Morgan writes, "The tribe begins each day by saying thank you. Thank you for the day, for themselves, their friends, the world. They carried no provisions. They planted no crops. They participated in no harvest. They walked the blazing Australian outback, knowing each day they would receive bountiful blessings. And as a result, they never went without food." What distinguishes the tribe, however, is not only their attitude of thankfulness, but rather what we might call their awareness of blessings and their willingness to live in the moment. Their willingness to live day by day. That and their willingness to see those blessings in places you and I might miss. They saw those blessings in ways that were reminiscent of manna made with the dried out secretions of plant lice. For the tribe's members were more than willing to eat things like snake, grubs, soldier ants, strange-looking plants. And they viewed them all as gifts. They viewed them all as blessings. Kervin Dimney tells of a recent flight he took which rather unusually offered a meal to each passenger. As the flight attendant made her way down the aisle, she asked the passenger seated in front of Dimney, "Would you like dinner?" The man looked up from his book and asked, What are my choices? Yes or no, she said. I'm not suggesting we all should become wandering Israelites and eat manna and quail. I'm not suggesting we become aborigines and munch on snake meat and ants. God forbid. I'm not even suggesting we subsist on airline food. But I am suggesting the blessings of each day are already here. And we just need to be willing to set aside our expectations so that we can see them. Yes or no, friends? Will you look for the blessings right in front of you, or will you be caught up in expectations? Will you live in the here and now, or will you linger in the past, longing for the future? The choice is yours. Yes or no? How will you butter the bread of your life? Will you butter it with expectations and never even take a bite? Or will you butter it with blessings and feast on the goodness that is already